On February 23rd through the 25th, your Nashville Symphony returns to Schermerhorn Symphony Center for the next Aegis Sciences Classical Series concerts, and what a weekend it will be. The program features the Schermerhorn debut of Igor Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, one of the most revolutionary pieces in the classical repertoire, as well as a live recording of Terry Riley's At the Royal Majestic. Like Stravinsky, Riley can be credited with transforming music in the 20th century. Each composer's innovations influenced not just the music you hear in the concert hall, but also the sounds coming out of your radio or your iPod, no matter whether you're a fan of classical, rock, or hip-hop. And yet, in some ways, these two pioneering figures couldn't have been more different. One was an imperial-era Russian who was once linked romantically to Coco Chanel, and the other, a free-spirited Californian with an appreciation for American ragtime and Indian ragas. But it's not that hard to find the connections between them, as you're about to find out in this installment of the Nashville Symphony's 6 Degrees of Separation, Igor Stravinsky, and Terry Riley. So, the Rite of Spring, besides being one of the most well-known pieces in classical music, also boasts perhaps the most scandalous debut. During the 1913 premiere in Paris, it actually caused a riot. The avant-garde music and choreography whipped the audience into a frenzy. Objects were thrown on stage, and the din was so loud that none of the dancers could even hear the music. The violence at the premiere notwithstanding, most critics knew Stravinsky was onto something. One French musicologist opined that the composer had written music 30 years ahead of its time, suitable to be heard in 1940, the very year that Walt Disney released his animated feature film Fantasia, which uses music from the Rite of Spring to depict the Earth's prehistory. Fantasia made an impression on Gunther Schuller, who would go on to become a composer, conductor, horn player, and a jazz scholar. The Rite of Spring sequence in the film overwhelmed him and helped chart his future in music. I hope Stravinsky appreciated that hundreds, perhaps thousands of musicians were turned on to the Rite of Spring through Fantasia, he would say. Schuller, whose father was a violinist in the New York Philharmonic, was only 15 when Fantasia was released. But by that time, he was already playing horn for the American Ballet Theatre, the start of a musical journey that would ultimately span more than 6 decades and include recording with the one and only Miles Davis. Davis, along with Charles Mingus, John Coltrane, Bill Evans, and many others, was a huge influence on Terry Riley. In fact, it was Chet Baker's rendition of Davis's seminal piece, So What, that Riley looped during his very first experiments using 2 tape recorders to generate a tape delay feedback system that he called a time lag accumulator shortly after graduating from Berklee in 1961. The time lag accumulator sparked Riley's interest in musical repetition, which culminated just 3 years later with his most famous work, In C, a piece built from 53 separate sound patterns that launched the minimalist music movement and impacted the work of everyone from composers John Adams and Philip Glass to The Who and other rock electronic groups like Kraftwerk, Tangerine Dream, Curved Air, and others. So there you have it, Igor Stravinsky to Terry Riley in 6 steps, with some rioting Parisians, a classic Disney film, and some of the biggest names in jazz along the way. Visit NashvilleSymphony.org to learn more about this program and get your tickets to the Rite of Spring.